you go. So take your Bibles, and we'll dive right into it. Ecclesiastes, chapter number 2. If you weren't here last week, we started a new study through the book of Ecclesiastes. Quite frankly, it's probably the most depressing, nihilistic book in all of the Bible. Not that you would think that there's a nihilistic book in the Bible, but it feels that way, at least the first 11 chapters. And this is why I think this is important for you. If you weren't here last week, if you didn't hear the opening sermon or the opening presentation of this study, this is one of those studies, one of those rare times where you really, really ought to know the opening of this book if any of these next chapters are going to make sense to you. And so if you haven't listened to that sermon, go online and listen to that. A lot of it, I laid the foundation as to where this book is going to be going and also the life of which it surrounds, because this is one of those books where if you don't understand the life of Solomon, what you're reading is not going to make a lot of sense to you. And so it's really important that you understand who Solomon was, how he lived his life, and why he came to such conclusions that he did. Also, you need to understand this. The book, once again, every chapter is going to feel very, very depressing, extremely depressing. But hang on, because we're going to get to chapter 12. The last verses of chapter number 12 is going to bring everything to a head and bring meaning and purpose to it. Ultimately, what Solomon is doing here, and I guess you could say the goal of Ecclesiastes, is to let Solomon, who is the teacher, the preacher, deconstruct all the ways we find meaning and purpose in life apart from God. And this is where there's two phrases I had mentioned to you that emerge again and again in the book. One is the Hebrew word hevel. It's in your modern translation, sometimes it's translated as vanity, sometimes it's translated as meaningless, sometimes it's translated as empty. All of those futile, those are all English words that work. It's a very interesting Hebrew word because it's one of those words in the ancient language that's kind of describing something that's very difficult in the English language to pinpoint exactly. I told you last week, if I were to try to give you an image of what hevel means, think of like a soap bubble that's floating through the air and you try to grab it, and when you do, it pops and it's gone. Or maybe a mirage off in the distance and you see it and it looks real, and you're pursuing it, but once you get to it, it's gone. And what Solomon is doing is deconstructing all of our human ideas about approaching, attempting, trying to achieve happiness, joy, purpose, meaning in life by all of the things, another key phrase in this book, under the sun. Or in other words, whatever is in this natural plane that we live in. If you're looking for happiness, meaning, purpose, joy in this world, you may get tidbits of it, but it's not lasting, it's not eternal. And even when you do achieve it, because a lot of people achieve the things that they're pursuing in life. You know, they wanted that gold medalist finish, or they wanted that certain amount in their bank account, or they wanted that relationship that they pursued, or you name it. All kinds of things in life that we've pursued passionately, we've given ourselves over to passionately, thinking that once I have this, I'll be happy. And for a brief moment, that was true. But then, once you made it there, it's like that soap bubble. It just kind of, now you're like, what's next? I've gotten here, but now I still feel empty. You can have a very full life and still have an extremely empty soul. And that is exactly what Solomon is struggling with. If you remember, Solomon, God had come to him as a young teenager and said, I'll give you whatever you want. Heads of your enemies, fame, power, whatever you want, I'll give it to you. He asked for wisdom, and I think along with wisdom came immense knowledge. So I would say Solomon is probably the wisest man that ever lived, other than Jesus, and perhaps the smartest man who ever lived. And he lived this long life where he had the opportunity to do, be, own, have, whatever he ever wanted. And in the end, he realized, ultimately to his soul, it was emptiness. So I ask you this morning, what brings lasting purpose and meaning and happiness to your life? What brings you happiness? What brings you meaning? What brings you lasting joy? And you may be in that futile, endless pursuit of those things right now, hanging on to the hope that when you get there, you'll have it, and it'll be forever. But I can assure you, along with Solomon, that is just not the case. If it's under the sun, if it's earthly, if it's material, if it's temporal, if it's of this time and space, guaranteed, it will not be long-lasting to the soul. And so what is the answer then? Well, you're going to have to look beyond what is just earthly to what is beyond here. You need to look to heaven. You need to look to God. The Greek philosopher Plato, I think, said it well when he said, man is a being in search of meaning. That's all of you, by the way. That's a truthful statement, even though it's not out of the Scripture. That's a truthful statement. Man is born searching for meaning. Dr. Clara Hill, she's a psychologist professor for the University of Maryland, wrote a book a couple of years ago entitled Meaning in Life, A Therapist's Guide. And in her book, she said almost every problem that's brought into therapy is implicitly about the meaning of life. All of us are struggling with meaning and purpose every single day of our life. And therapists deal with this on a daily basis. Unfortunately, most secular, psychologists and therapists, they're going to be looking at the material, the tangible, all that exists within time and space, but not really dealing with the spiritual and the divine. And Solomon obviously had already walked down all of these paths in life and had concluded that none of them work. They don't work. So you have to look beyond here. There has to be more than this. And so you have to look up to God. So if you're there in Ecclesiastes chapter number 2, where we're going to begin today, he's continuing this pursuit. As we saw in chapter number 1, he realizes that nothing ever changes, nothing's ever new. There's a circular pattern to human nature. There's a circular pattern to nature itself. And so what's the use? Everything's just in a circular pattern. It's whatever is happening is going to happen again, and it's just it's rotating over and over and over again. So that was kind of depressing for him. And then he has this idea that everything and everyone is eventually forgotten. I mean, whether you're wise or you accomplish much, it really doesn't matter. Over enough period of time, you will no longer exist in the minds of other people. You'll be completely forgotten. Stuff is forgotten. People are forgotten. 100 years from now, 500 years from now, 1,000 years from now, 3,000 years from now, 5,000 years from now, no one will know your name or what you did. And so Solomon's battling that in his own mind and heart, like, why am I building all this stuff? Why am I doing all these things? Why am I living the life that I'm living? And ultimately, in the end, it doesn't ultimately matter. I'll just disappear in time like literally everyone else. And so that's the struggle that's going on in his mind and heart. And that continues, once again, for 11 chapters. So in this chapter, chapter number 2, he lays out 3 pursuits in life that will leave you empty. These are pursuits that he himself pursued. And you could look at these pursuits as kind of Solomon realizing, like, ultimately nothing's going to give me lasting happiness, so I'm going to experiment with this. I'm going to see where it goes. And so this is kind of his attempt to make himself happy. And he serves as, I told you this last week, I believe God created Solomon as the quintessential model, the quintessential template, the quintessential example that all of humanity could look to and go, if I achieve that, it won't make me happy, because he achieved almost everything that you could possibly think of. Mark Twain once said that everyone serves as an example, if only just as a bad example. And Solomon serves certainly as a bad example. And so let's look at some of these. Verse number 1 is the first attempt that he makes. And what he reveals in these next 11 verses is the emptiness of living for pleasure. The emptiness of living. Many of you are living right now for pleasure. Whether you realize it or not, that is your life pursuit. You're living for pleasure. I hope these next 11 verses help you understand it's futile. It won't work. You'll lose in the end. Notice how he begins verse number 1. I said in my heart, pause there. That's a bad start. I said in my heart. Don't ever begin with your heart. That's not a good starting point. He says, I said in my heart, verse number 3, he says, I searched in my heart. Searching your heart for the answers to life is not the best place to look either. In verse number 10, he said, I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure. So he said, I said to my heart, and I searched in my heart, and I didn't withhold anything from my heart. Some of you are doing the same thing because you grew up listening to the Disney movies that said, just follow your heart. Do what you think is right. Listen to your heart. That's the dumbest advice you will ever be given in your life. Do not ever do that. That's a no-go. That's a no-starter. And this is where Solomon's at. You know what? None of this other stuff is working, so I'm going to listen to my heart. I'm going to follow my heart. I'm going to pursue whatever my heart tells me is going to please me. But let's remember that the prophet Jeremiah told us that the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? You do not even comprehend how depraved your own heart is. And left to your heart, you'll always be led astray. And this is obviously what happens to Solomon. And he recognizes this. In chapter 7 and verse number 4, he says, the heart of fools is in the house of myrrh, or the house of pleasure. It's the foolish heart that is pursuing pleasure. It doesn't fix anything. So let's continue reading verse number 1. He says, I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with mirth, or that word means pleasure. I'll test you with pleasure. In other words, he's kind of, it's like he's doing a science experiment with himself. He says, come now, I will test you with mirth, therefore, and enjoy pleasure. Let's see if all of my depression, anxiety goes away if I fill the void with as much pleasure as I can. Pursue whatever my heart tells me will please me. If I pursue those things, I think that'll fix the problem. I think I'll find meaning and purpose and happiness in life. And so he's doing this science experiment, but the end of verse number 1 tells us how the experiment goes. What are the test results? Well, verse number 1 ends with this, saying, but surely this also was hevel, it was vanity, it was emptiness, it was meaningless, it didn't work. Some of you are old enough to look over the decades of your life and realize that all of those times that you followed your heart and you pursued pleasure, that you can sit here this morning and attest to the words of Solomon and say, yes, I agree. I too did not find the meaning and the purpose and the joy that I was looking for. So you can look at Solomon and go, yep, I figured it out, he's figured it out. Some of you young people, I hope this morning you can figure it out this morning too. Listen to the wisdom of an elderly teacher this morning. Not me. I'm still very young. Although even if it's only in my mind, I'm very young. I'm going to hold on to that as long as I can. No, it's Solomon here being an older man. Listen to the wisdom of this older man here. Now, notice some of the things he tested. So he listened to his heart, and his heart told him to do a couple of these things. One of those is in verse number 2. He tried the pleasure of laughter. It says, I said of laughter, madness or silliness is what that means. And of mirth or pleasure, what does it accomplish? So what he's saying here is in my testing, in my experimentation of what will bring me happiness, I started with laughter. Just laughing feels good. And if I can laugh enough, maybe that gives me meaning and purpose in life. And so he kind of turned the palace into Comedy Central. And he brings in Robin Williams and Jim Carrey, and he brings in all these other comedians. And he does, it's just laughter, it's happiness. And they have a big party, and it's fun, and everything seems to be going well for a while. And in the end, even that got boring. Even that wasn't fulfilling for him. Now, it's not that laughter is bad, so don't misunderstand. I love to laugh. And I love to, I love some of you who know me on a personal level outside of Sunday, because up here I'm kind of serious a lot of times, but when I'm not up here, particularly at home, I'm a goofball. I like to have fun. I enjoy life. I enjoy joking and picking fun of people and stuff like that. Maybe a little too much. And that's not a bad thing, per se. Solomon said in the book of Proverbs that laughter is as a medicine. It's like a medicine to the soul. It's not bad to laugh. It's not bad to have fun. It's actually a very, physically and spiritually, it's actually a very good thing for you to have laughter and in that type of pleasure in your life. But if you're looking for fulfillment and meaning to life, you're not going to find it in laughter. He'll also say in Proverbs 14 and verse number 13, even in laughter, the heart may sorrow, and the end of pleasure may be grief. And we can see this in our own life, in our own day and age that we live in. It was just a couple of years ago that Robin Williams committed suicide because of the depression that he was constantly fighting with year after year. I remember hearing Jim Carrey, who once said, "I live my life in a low level of constant despair." This is true of a lot of comedians, by the way. One of the ways that they cope with their depression, one of the ways that they cope with their despair is making other people laugh. And if they can make other people laugh, then it makes them laugh and it makes them feel good. But in the end, it doesn't fix the problem, it masks it. It's a Band-Aid, but it's not a healing to the soul. It's a soul problem that needs to be dealt with. And so even laughter, as fun as it is and as enjoyment as you get in it, it's not the answer. Notice in verse number 3, he tried the pleasure of alcohol as well. It says in verse 3, I searched in my heart how to gratify my flesh with wine, while guiding my heart with wisdom and how to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was good for the sons of men to do under heaven all the days of their lives. And so he's like, you know what, laughter wasn't doing it, so let me try alcohol, let me try wine. It's interesting to me. I don't know if you've ever think about this for a moment. You ever notice when there's a toast that's about to happen, they lift up their glass of wine or alcohol and they say, cheers! And then they begin to drink. There's this misconception that something physical like alcohol can bring joy to your life. Maybe temporal, maybe for a moment. But Solomon's like, in the end it didn't work. I regretted it later on. It wasn't fulfilling. And just so I'm clear about this morning, Solomon is he's not saying it's wrong or sinful to drink alcohol. The Bible's very clear on this particular subject. In fact, it's very simplistic on this subject. When it comes to drinking and when it comes to eating, there's a very simple general rule. To drink too much is called drunkenness, and that is prohibited in Scripture. To eat too much is called gluttony, and that is prohibited in Scripture. The Bible never prohibits drinking, just as it doesn't prohibit eating. It's just to not overdo those things. If you drink too much, you can bring harm to yourself. And if you eat too much, you can bring harm to yourself, and those are prohibited. And so Solomon says, I tried drinking, I tried partying, but it didn't work. And so he invites Garth Brooks over to the palace and sings, I've got friends in low places where the whiskey drowns and the beer causes my blues to go away. And here he is, he's like, let's try this, and it just doesn't work. Speaking of songs, as I was reading this verse, a song from the 70s, The Piano Man from Billy Joel, some of you know what I'm talking about. Very famous, well-known song. If you listen to the lyrics of that song, some people like the tune. They love the tune of the song. But have you ever really thought about what is the song saying? What is the message in the song? Listen to the lyrics. It's 9 o'clock on a Saturday. The regular crowd shuffles in. There's an old man sitting next to me, making love with his tonic and gin. He says, son, can you play me a memory? I'm not really sure how it goes, but it's sad and it's sweet, and I knew it complete when I wore a younger man's clothes. Now, John at the bar is a friend of mine. He gets me my drinks for free, and he's quick with a joke or to light up your smoke, but there's some place that he'd rather be. He says, Bill, I believe this is killing me, as a smile ran away from his face. Well, I'm sure that I could be a movie star if I could get out of this place. Now, Paul is a real estate novelist who never had time for a wife, and he's talking to Davy, who's still in the Navy and probably will be for life. And the waitress is practicing politics as the businessmen slowly get stoned. Yes, they're sharing a drink they call loneliness, but it's better than drinking alone. Sing us the song, you're the piano man. Sing us a song tonight. Well, we're all in good mood for a melody, and you've got us feeling all right. It's a pretty good crowd for Saturday, and the manager gives me a smile because he knows that it's me they've come to see, to forget about life for a while. You listen to the words of that song, and it becomes very clear. You got a whole crowd of people on a Saturday night looking to alcohol to mask the hurt and the pain and the grief and the regret and try to find a little bit of escape from all of life's hurts, but it's only for Saturday night. They'll wake up with the regret tomorrow and not find happiness or meaning or purpose in the bottle whatsoever. So he looks to laughter and he looks to the alcohol. But look at verse number 4. He reveals the emptiness of all our accomplishments as well. Now, this is a sin that I would argue, many of us commit without realizing it. We do these things unaware of how they're grieving the heart of God. Notice what he says in verse 4. I made my works great. So he's like, you know what? Laughter didn't do it, and the alcohol didn't do it. I wonder, my life needs to have purpose, and so I need to build my kingdom, and I need to build stuff, and I need to build a name for myself. And so what does he do here? He says, well, first of all, he says, I built myself houses. Well, 13 years he built one house, the palace. It's like he certainly did build himself some houses, but he built houses all across the northern stretch of Israel. As people were moving in and the population of Israel was booming, these were the great days of Israel. So he's out there building all of these places for people to live, and he built all these houses. A lot of you may not be King Solomon, but you're doing the same thing. You're like, well, I've got the house paid off. Let's buy another house. Let's get a house in Florida. Let's get a house in Arizona. Let's kind of branch out. Let's rent them out. Let's amass some really good equity for ourselves so that when I retire, I'll be secure, I'll be happy, I'll be peaceful, everything will be wonderful. And there's nothing wrong in that. That's not bad. That's actually a good thing, unless your pursuit of that is because you think it'll make you happy. If you think that owning stuff will make you happy, you're totally wrong and deceived. And it won't. It won't do it at all. He goes on to say in verse number 4 that I planted myself vineyards, and I made myself gardens and orchards, and I planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. Not just houses. It's like, let's have some orchards, and let's grow some apples, and let's grow some berries, and let's pears, and let's really branch out and have all kinds of great vineyards and gardens and orchards, and that'll secure all the food, and they'll be beautiful, and they'll make the place nice, and it's fun and enjoyable to do. It'll be a nice hobby, and it was fun for a little bit, but it doesn't fulfill. And once again, is it a sin to have a garden or an orchard or to be an orchard owner? Of course not. But if you're doing those things thinking that this is where happiness comes from, you're going to fail. It doesn't work that way. In verse number 6, he says, I made myself water pools from which the growing trees of the grove. And these water pools, in the ancient world and in the Babylonian Empire, it was very popular to see some of these things as well. When you say water pools, we're not talking about a pond to which they could draw water out to feed it. It's more like a really nice swimming pool, and that you could swim in and hang out at and be at. And from the swimming pool, the trees get watered and so forth, and you have your servants working all around there, and it just becomes this nice, beautiful. Years ago when I lived in Nashville, Tennessee, you had the Grand Ole Opry Hotel called the Gaylord Hotel. If any of you have been there, you know what I'm talking about. It's an insanely crazy hotel. This is a hotel, if you don't have a map, you will get lost in this hotel. It's so doggone big, and all these rooms all over the place. And every time you go into a room, I'm talking about massive, massive rooms. They have indoor rivers and waterfalls and all kinds of every vegetation and plant you can think of. And it's a crazy hotel. And you go from room to room, and it's all these pools of water and trees and beautiful. And it's just a gorgeous, gorgeous place. And if you built that for yourself, I would imagine Solomon built similar types of things. And when it was all said and done, he felt like, okay, is this now happiness? And of course, now that the task is done, the answer is no. It was emptiness. It was hevel. It vanished as soon as he had got there. In verse number 7, he says, I acquired male and female servants and had servants born in my house. Yes, I had greater possessions of herds and flocks than all who were in Jerusalem before me. So I've got all these employees. I've got people that serve me. Look at this person waving the palm branch to cool me down, and someone to bring me my cup of iced tea, and all these servants around me working in my garden, and the pool boy out there keeping the pool clean. I've got all these workers and employees all around me, and I've got herds and flocks, which in the ancient world were the equivalent of having an immense amount of currency, and I'm set, I'm secure. Verse number 8, he says, I also gathered for myself silver and gold and the special treasures of the kings of the provinces. You say, how much silver and gold did he get? Well, the Bible tells us in 1 Kings that there was so much silver in Jerusalem during the reign of King Solomon that silver became valueless. It didn't have value anymore. It was everywhere, and everybody had it because he had amassed so much of it. So it didn't have any meaning or value to it anymore. Didn't matter if he had all these servants working for him. In verse number 8, it says, I acquired male and female singers, the delights of the sons of men, and musical instruments of all kinds. It's like, I had Justin Bieber and Britney Spears, and I had the Backstreet Boy, you name it, whoever, whatever. I mentioned a bunch of older groups. I don't know who's it. I'm old school. I'd have John Diver. I'd resurrect him from the dead, have John Diver sing. It's like, I had all these people. Come and sing. And it's like, it was fun. It was great. It was great. But in the end, not fulfilling. Look at verse number 9. So I became great. In other words, I became famous. He was famous. In fact, all of the world wanted to see Solomon. They'd heard of him. Bathsheba, when the queen of Bathsheba came to visit with Solomon, she said, the half has not yet been told. I had heard stories, I had been told things, but now that my eyes are seeing it, I can't believe what I'm seeing. He became famous in the world. He says, I became great and excelled more than all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also, my wisdom remained with me. I didn't lose, God didn't take the wisdom from me. He didn't remove that gift from me. I maintained that. In spite of the fact that I wasn't doing or living the way God wanted me to, I still had wisdom. And I was able to amass even more wealth and power and fame because of it. But it didn't fulfill me. Verse number 10, I think, is probably the key verse of the entire text. He says, whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure. Unfortunately, some of you are probably doing the exact same thing right now. You're just like, you know what? Whatever pleases me, that's what I'm going to do. I mean, isn't life about being happy? And I'll pursue what makes me happy. And Solomon said, I did that. I tried that. It didn't work. He says, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my reward for all my labor. How did all this pleasure seeking go for Solomon? All this amassing of power and wealth and people and possessions, how did it go for him? How did it fare in the end? Well, verse number 11 says, then I looked on all the works that my hands had done and on the labor in which I had toiled, and indeed all was vanity and grasping for the wind. There is no profit under the sun. Everything. All of that stuff that we had just talked about. Listening to my heart, pursuing my heart, doing whatever pleased my heart. In the end, it was just grasping at the wind. I didn't obtain any joy. I didn't get any peace. There wasn't any lasting meaningness in it. And in the end, it was just vapor. It was hevel. It was meaningless. I wasted the time to even pursue that stuff. Now drop down to verse 18, if you would. In verse number 18, he says this, because of all of that, because he realized the emptiness of his pursuit of pleasure and stuff, this was his takeaway. Then I hated all my labor in which I had toiled under the sun, because I must leave it to the man who will come after me. That was the conclusion of his thought. It's like, you know what? Everything that I've done, all of this that I've amassed, ultimately I can't hold on to it forever. It's going to be gone. And then somebody else is going to get it. And notice what he says in verse number 19. And who knows whether he will be wise or a fool? Yet he will rule over all my labor, in which I toiled, and in which I have shown myself wise under the sun. This also is vanity. Therefore I turned my heart and despaired of all the labor in which I had toiled under the sun. For there is a man whose labor is worth wisdom, knowledge, and skill, yet he must leave his heritage to a man who has not labored for it. This also is vanity and a great evil. Solomon looked past the moment and realized, wait a minute, I'm going to die. Everybody's going to die. And then all of this stuff that I've built, all of this money that I've gotten, all of these servants, all of this stuff, it's like somebody else is going to get it. And I don't know if that person is going to be wise with it. I don't know if they're going to do the right thing. That's out of my control. I can't control my possessions is what he's saying. I can't control, I have no control over the future of this. And in the end, it's all gone. It's all gone. And Solomon wasn't a prophet, but he was prophetic in saying this because in the end, his two sons, Rehoboam and Jeroboam, they are the ones who inherited all of this stuff. Neither one of them was wise with the possessions, and the kingdom was split. It never was brought together again. In the end, 10 tribes are lost, and all of the nation of Israel eventually goes into captivity, either in Assyria or Babylon. And in the end, the kingdom is torn apart and destroyed. All of that, all the work, all of Solomon's life work, gone in one generation. Gone. So even though he didn't know that was what was going to happen, he was wise enough and knowledgeable enough to know that this is how it works. I've seen it again and again in the history books, and I'm in the process of making history myself, so this is what's going to happen in my life as well. So why am I even trying? Why am I even trying? He says in verse 22, for what has man for all his labor and for the striving of his heart with which he has toiled under the sun? For all his days are sorrowful and his work burdensome. Even in the night his heart takes no rest. This also is vanity. Now let me be clear here. The Bible commands us to work hard. The Bible commands us to leave a heritage for our children. There's nothing wrong with that. The Bible commands us to store up and to think wisely about our possessions. And so that's not wrong. What Solomon did was not wrong, but the Bible tells us not to find purpose and meaning in those things. Leaving a great heritage for your children is not a sin. It is a sin if you think that's what's going to give you happiness. That's wrong. That's a horrible way of thinking. That something material is going to bless you spiritually. If taking care of the needs of your children in the future is going to make your future happy, that's just not true. It's not true, and it won't happen. And unfortunately, a lot of Americans feel this way. They believe this way, and they live their life this way. I was reading this week that in the last 50 years, the average size of the American house has tripled in size. I mean, you can just see this in, new constructions. In the last 50 years, the size of the American home has tripled. And in the same amount of time, more Americans store stuff in storage units than ever before. So the size of their houses have tripled, and Americans have to have storage units because their houses are not big enough. Now, that tells us that we own more than we've ever owned before. And there's no way of saying that we're happy because everybody knows Americans are not happier today. I also read this week that America makes up 3.1% of the children of the world. 3.1% of the children of the world. And yet, out of that 3.1% of all the children of the world, the American children own 40% of all the toys in the world. So we don't make up a majority of the children of the world, but we certainly have all the toys of the world. And you can't convince me that the children of America are the happiest children in the world. It's just not true. Every year, on an average, Americans throw away 65 pounds of clothes that they no longer want. Not that they're broken or bad or tore or anything like that. They just don't want them anymore. went out of style or something, just don't like it. Not really me. So, or I got bored with it and I have to have something. Listen to 65 pounds. The average American throws away 65 pounds of clothes every year because they want something new. It has been said that Americans spend more money on their shoes than they do on college education. It's crazy to think about. Crazy. Now, I hate to bring in my son on this, but boy, my son buys the shoes these days. It's like, that's kind of his hobby now. He gets his paycheck. It's like, okay, what pair of shoes do I want to get? And I remember those days myself thinking, okay, I got to have a new pair of shoes all the time. And we get sucked into these type of, these cycles where this will, now I can complain about my son buying shoes. You all know me. And me talking about disc golf and stuff. I'll buy a Frisbee, I'll buy a disc every week if I could. It's like, and I don't know why. It's the stupidest thing. It's like, why do I need another one? I literally hate to even admit that. I own hundreds of Frisbees. Hundreds of discs. And like, well, I want a new pink one. They got the swirls on it, this brand, different material. It's like, it's so dumb. Why do I do this? And every time I purchase one, I'm like, what? I did not need that. I did not need that. And you got your little, so don't laugh at me. You got your little thing too. Because I know some of the little hobbies and things that you collect and stuff that, like we're all this way. Every one of us are this way. And but did you have enough? Did you ever make it to a conclusion and now you've reached all that you ever needed and now you're happy and you're complete and you're content? And the answer is obviously not. And this is why Jesus said this in Luke chapter 12, verse 23. Life is more than food and the body is more than clothing. Life is more than food and clothes. And you can throw in whatever else, those other things that we pursue, those material things. That is not life. That's not what makes life. Stop buying into the false American dream that if I just own enough, if I have enough, if I achieve enough, if I amass enough, I'll be happy. And Jesus says, no. Life is not made up by what you wear or what you eat. Does not make life. Those are just necessities to life, but they do not give you meaning and purpose and joy to life. And so Jesus says in Luke chapter 12 and verse number 15, take heed and beware of covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of the things he possesses. Be aware of that. Your life does not consist of that. Be aware of how your heart can deceive you that way. Lastly, this morning, look at verse number 12. Solomon talks about the emptiness of knowledge and wisdom, and nobody had more than him, and so he can speak as an expert on this. But he says in verse number 12, then I turned myself to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do who succeeds the king? Only what he has already done. Then I saw that wisdom excels folly as light excels darkness. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. Yet I myself perceived that the same event happens to them all. Now, what he's saying is this. I pursued wisdom. I pursued knowledge. I wanted to understand everything. I wanted to live in immense wisdom. But then I realized in the end, smart people die just like dumb people. And wise people die just like unwise people. So what did I accomplish in the end? Did I make it a little bit further? Did I live 1,000 years longer or infinitely longer than the dumb guy? No, I didn't. I'm going to die along with him. So in the end, did it benefit? No, it didn't. It didn't change anything. We all die. We're all going to die. Whether you're smart or dumb, you're going to die. Look at what he says in verse number 15. So I said in my heart, as it happens to the fool, it also happens to me. And why was I then more wise? Then I said in my heart, this also is vanity. For there is no more remembrance of the wise than there is of the fool forever. Since all that now is will be forgotten in the days to come. And how does a wise man die? As the fool. Ultimately, if you think past today, you think past tomorrow, and you look at the longevity of everything, then you realize, in the end, fools die, wise people die, we all die. And eventually be forgotten. So, who won? Nobody. See, this is why I say I believe Solomon is the wisest man and the smartest man that ever lived, because he didn't think about the here and now. He thought way past it. His thoughts transcended the things that we're usually trapped in, and he looks past it. And he realizes, in the end, we all end up the same. Humanity all ends up the same in the end. So he says in verse number 17, therefore, I hated life, because the work that was done under the sun, and that's the key phrase once again, under the sun, if your life consists of nothing more than the tangible time and space of the realm that you live in right now, then you're probably going to start to hate your life too. He says, I hated my life because the work that was done under the sun was distressing to me, for all is vanity and grasping for the wind. This is similar in my mind, at least, to what Paul said in 1 Corinthians 13, verse number 2, when he said, and though I have all the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I could remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. It's the same idea. Paul's like, if I had all knowledge and all wisdom and I can understand all things and I had all prophecy and I had, my head was just bigger than everybody else's and I could see and think and say stuff that nobody else did, and I didn't have love, then it was a waste of time. Meaningless, purposeless. Solomon comes to the same conclusion here. A couple of weeks ago I read a long poem. I'm not going to read it all this morning, but a poem from C.T. Studd. Some of you probably heard this. I had heard a piece of it, but I'd never heard the whole thing before. C.T. Studd, a great missionary from the 1800s. He served in China and India and Africa, gave his entire life to serve God. And he wrote this poem, very powerful poem. It goes like this. 2 little lines I heard one day, traveling along life's busy way, bringing conviction to my heart and from my mind would not depart. Only one life, 'twill soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last. Only one life, yes, only one. Soon will its fleeting hours be done, then in that day my Lord to meet and stand before his judgment seat. Only one life will soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last. Only one life, the still small voice gently pleads for a better choice, bidding my selfish aims to leave and to God's holy will to cleave. Only one life will soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last. Only one life, a few brief years, each with its burdens, hopes, and fears, each with its clays I must fulfill, living for self or in his will. Only one life, 'twill soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last. When this bright world would tempt me sore, when Satan would a victor score, when self would seek to have its way, then help me, Lord, with joy to say, only one life, 'twill soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last. If you're going to take away a message from Ecclesiastes chapter 2 this morning, that should be the message. You can pursue whatever you want, trying to amass happiness. You will not achieve it apart from God. You will not achieve it apart from Christ. And only what you do in this life for Christ is the only thing that matters ultimately. You are an eternal being. So stop trying to live as a temporal being. Stop trying to live for the temporal things in life. This is one of the reasons why Jesus told his disciples, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and thief and rust can destroy. Why? Because they're not eternal. They're temporal. Stop living for the temporal and start amassing the eternal, because that's the only thing ultimately that matters. Pursue the things that are everlasting, the things that will give you joy forever. So what is Solomon's conclusion here? Look at verse 24. Solomon's conclusion is this. Nothing is better for a man than that he should eat and drink, that his soul should enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw was from the hand of God. Now, if you're not catching this is basically 2 truths that he's overlapping. He just spent a lot of time saying, this stuff is meaningless. That's the whole chapter. This stuff is meaningless. But then his conclusion is, We should eat and drink and take joy in these good things that our hands have labored. This is why he says in verse 24, this I also saw. See, this is a truth that he sees on top of that. Is it meaningless and temporal? Absolutely. Absolutely it is. But on top of that truth, another layer of truth is God gave us all that. He gave it for us for this time that we live in, for the earthly life that we have here. So yes, eat and drink and enjoy the labor of your hands and enjoy the life that you have on this earth. This is from God. Don't go through life miserable. Don't look at the stuff that you've amassed and be miserable by it. Enjoy it here, but look past it. Look past it as it's not the end, it's not the goal, it's not the purpose, it's the pleasures that God has given us here and now, but He is the grand prize. He is the thing that gives us the ultimate joy. He is what we're pursuing to win in the life to come. So enjoy the things that our God has given us here, so that when we move beyond here to the eternal, we enjoy Him even more. So he goes on to say in verse 25, for who can eat or who can have enjoyment? Now the New King James translation says more than I, but many of your translations will say apart from him or something similar to that. And I hate to get into translation debates on Sunday mornings. If you want to talk about linguistic challenges with me later on, that's fine. The Hebrew is a language, unlike Greek, Hebrew is a language that you have many linguistic challenges when trying to translate into English. And the reason why is because the Hebrew language, certain words or phrases, how you translate it into English is completely depend upon the context of which it was said. And so Bible translators will debate with one another about what the context of a passage is about, and so they end up debating about how the word or words should be translated. And this is one of those cases where it's kind of a 50-50. Some Bible translators would say, well, I think this is Solomon talking about himself, and others say, no, this is Solomon talking about God. And honestly, this is one of those passages where it seems pretty simple to me. If you read the preceding verse and the following verse and the current verse, it becomes very clear that Solomon is obviously talking about God. He's not talking about himself, he's talking about God. And so it should read more like this, for who can eat or enjoy anything apart from him? Which is ultimately what the whole point of the chapter is about. I could not find pleasure in laughter. I could not find pleasure in alcohol. I could not find pleasure in amassing stuff on earth. And so, apart from God, how can I even have pleasure in this stuff? That's what Solomon's saying. This is why I say the book of Ecclesiastes feels like a nihilistic book. But it's not a nihilistic book because in the end, he's not an atheist and he's not saying that everything is meaningless. What he's saying is everything under the sun is meaningless apart from God. If there's no God in the equation, then everything is circular. And what I mean by that is most philosophers and you could say non-Christian theologians of the past, and even throw in the Greek philosophers, they talked about this quite a bit, that life is circular. Everything's a circular pattern, just as they had mentioned in chapter number 1. And if that's the case, then there is no purpose, there is no meaning. It's a nihilistic idea. But the Bible makes it very clear from the beginning to end that life isn't circular, it's linear. Just think about how the Bible's written. The opening words of the Bible is, in the beginning, God. It begins not with a circular idea, but a linear idea that there is a start, and the start begins with God, and obviously there is a pathway to follow about what God is doing. And notice how the Bible ends in the book of Revelation, even so, Lord Jesus, come. There's a conclusion that all of human history has a purpose and a meaning and a destination. It's not circular. It doesn't mean that it's just with no end. It means that there's a beginning and there's an end, there's an origin and there's a destination. And because there's a linear nature to the life in the world that we live in, that gives purpose and meaning. But you're not going to find it down here on earth. That's why the Bible doesn't begin exclusively with earth. It begins with God. In the beginning, God. And if you don't start with God, you'll never end in a good place. It'll be sad, it'll be depressing. And so he says it has to come from God. Verse 26, for God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy to a man who is good in his sight, but to the sinner he gives the work of gathering and collecting that he may give to him who is good before God. This also is vanity and grasping for the wind. A lot of people struggle on what the meaning of verse number 26 is. I love this verse. The meaning is this. For those that are there's two groups of people. Those that are pursuing God for pleasure and happiness and meaning and purpose, that's those people. And those are the ones who receive grace. Those are the ones that please God. And then there's the rest of the world, those that are pursuing pleasure and peace and meaning and happiness in the stuff of the world around them. And who wins in the end? Well, the sinners that are pursuing happiness and pleasure and meaning and purpose in this world, he describes in verse number 26 as those that are gathering and collecting. But in the end, they're not the ones they don't get it. The imagery is this. You got the whole world, they're clamoring and fighting and pursuing to amass joy and happiness and purpose and meaning for their life in this current life, but it's like sand slipping through their hands. And who is ultimately going to catch? Who is ultimately going to be the one who gets joy, happiness, and purpose and meaning? It's going to be those who pursue God. It's going to be those who please God. And so this group, everything on this, not this side of the room, just this group, all these people of the world that are pursuing pleasure by the world, it's slipping through their fingers. They're never going to get pleasure. They're gathering and they're collecting, but they don't ultimately get to keep any of it. And then those over here that did not pursue life that way, they didn't pursue happiness and joy and peace by collecting and gathering the stuff of this world. Instead, they focused on God and pleasing Him. They're the ones that ultimately get it. In the end, they are the ones who will be rewarded this. And this is why Jesus said in Matthew 10:39, he who finds his life will lose it, and he who loses his life for my sake will find it. It's those who give up their life in this present life, those are the ones who get life. This is such a universal truth in Scripture. And yet we don't seem to comprehend it. We forget it so quickly. I'll close with a quote. I mentioned several songs and singers this morning. I'll throw in one more. Johnny Cash. Johnny Cash once said this, I have tried drugs and a little of everything else, and there is nothing in the world more soul satisfying than God. It takes a real man to live for God and a lot more to live for the devil. In other words, the hardest thing you'll ever do in life is to pursue God. The easiest thing you'll ever do in life is to pursue the devil, but there's nothing satisfying to the soul in it. There's nothing satisfying to the soul. I want to close with this prayer this morning. And honestly, this morning I kind of struggled. I don't even know how to close this other than for you to examine yourself. At the beginning of the chapter, Solomon said, I'm going to do this test and I'm going to see how it goes. And he used his life as a test. Well, instead of spending your whole life, why don't you just sit there where you're at and kind of do a little test in your own mind? Am I doing some of these things as well? And how's it going? And do I want to continue down that path? Or do I want to follow the wisdom of Scripture and to pursue Jesus Christ, knowing that only one life will be lived, it will soon be past, and the only thing that matters is what I do for Christ, believing Christ, trusting Christ, pursuing Christ. I hope that is how you will bring a conclusion to your life, putting Christ first in all things.